Hi, Paul. How are you?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Welcome to the Transfer of Awakening channel. I wanted to talk to you because I know you have a long history being on the spiritual path and you've had some experience with meditation and things like that. So, can you please start today by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Say what? Talk
Can,
about what?
can you start with a little bit about yourself?
Myself. Okay. Um, um, I'm, my mother is American and my father's Japanese. Um, I grew up in Japan till I was 20, and I came to America and learned transcendental meditation and moved to the TM community in Fairfield, Iowa. And so my spiritual journey began with TM, but once I got to Fairfield, Iowa's Super Radiance community, I got to get to know a lot of stuff. A lot of people would come to Fairfield and give lectures and seminars and workshops and weekends and things like that. People in different fields from healing to different spirituality to herbs to I don't know alien UFO ET stuff, shamanism, tantra, sexuality, things like that. So yeah, I got to be exposed to a lot of stuff. So I checked out a lot of stuff.
Oh,
A lot of
so Fairfield wasn't just a place with people who are only interested in TM.
No, no. It's called a community, but it's a very loose community. It's not like a community. It's not a community in the sense of like it's composed of only by the follower of something. It's the city already existed, way before the TM people came, and they just blended. And it's not like there's a separation there. We live together. So the term community and TM community it's a fairly loose term. And there's a whole range of people from the real devout, purist type to the, who's kind of pretty serious, but who's into a lot of different stuff to those who kind of pretty much forgot about TM and doing whatever. So there's a whole range of people living there, from the purist fundamentalist type to the very loose anything goes type and everything in between. That's the TM community there. So it's a market for people who are doing new agey stuff, spiritual stuff, healing stuff. A lot of people come there, and do their stuff, whatever it's healing or teaching or lecturing, workshop seminars. So yeah, especially during the 90s, I was very much a workshop junkie and tried out a lot of different stuff. So that was good.
So, what are some of the things that you liked?
Well, apart from Maharshi's TM in Vedic science, one of the most valuable thing I learned was David Data's teaching. David Data, when he came to Fairfield, he was still fairly new. His first book was still in draft form. Now he has quite a bit of publication. He, he he stopped using the word tantra to promote himself because the term is so misunderstood and causes too much misunderstandings. But what he teaches is like the true tantra, the real essence, the uncorrupt, like the more pure form of tantra, not the what some people might call Californian tantra with all that new age mumbo jumbo and kind of pseudo spiritual sex kind of stuff. It's his stuff is more it's real deep stuff. It's not just about sex or man-woman relationship. It's a very deep spiritual teaching. He wrote many books, and I haven't really checked him out recently, but his teaching was very deep. David Deida, I like him a lot. He teaches about the masculine feminine principles that govern creation and the range of masculine feminine principles. He calls it a Shiva Shakti scale, and um, the key term he uses is called intimate communion. That was a big term he used. It's like a higher level of man-woman relationship, although it's applicable to homosexual or anything. But he simplifies and just talks in terms of man-woman relationship. But he wrote a lot of good books, so that's one thing. I did Reiki. Reiki was good. Um, Reiki in its purest form, actually, very pure form of Reiki. Um, a lot of stuff. What I did else?
So, if we can back up a little bit. So, when you say in its purest form, Reiki, what do you mean by that?
With Reiki?
Yeah.
Yeah, Reiki, like the TM movement is very much into maintaining the purity of knowledge. Only qualified, trained TM teacher can teach knowledge, the TM. And, Maharshi's reviving and restoring the purity of Vedic knowledge, Vedic teaching. You know, anything, anything, you know, whether it's just some rumor or story to any, like or spiritual teaching, knowledge and information gets corrupt, it gets lost, it gets distorted all the time. Children play this game of, I don't know how to call it in English, game of telephone or telegram. You have a sentence that has who, when, what, where kind of thing, and you start with one child and the child whispers to another, and you do this chain thing till with 10 children or whatever, and by the end the sentence gets so distorted and changed. And Maharshi talks about how there's a gap between the master or the guru, the teacher, and the students. And, no matter how hard the teacher tries, there's this gap between the teacher and student, and, knowledge gets lost or twisted or misunderstood or whatever. He talks about Buddha, Gautama Siddhartha. He says Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, Buddha's teaching was perfect. He said, he said very high, spoke very highly of the Buddha, but he talks about this inevitable gap between the level of consciousness of the master teacher and the students, and no matter how sincere and good the students are, something gets lost. And Reiki is a great example of that. Well, it began in Japan, and I'm going to skip that part, but then it went to the West, or America first, by this woman named Hawayo Takata. She learned it, and then for many, many, many years, she was the only person practicing it. But she got old, and she wanted, she was going to leave sometime, so she felt the need to train teachers, and she trained 22 people, first 10 and then 12 people. So she made created 22 teachers, but then then those teachers not just healed people, but taught teachers as well. But people just some people just kind of blend their own stuff, modify it and change it and do their own things, and so there's a whole range of Reiki, from the purest to the completely corrupt version. Like my teacher's teacher was the very first teacher trained by Hawayo Takata, and that person, I forgot her name, but she wasn't allowed to take notes during training. So when the training session was over, she would go home and take very diligent. So the knowledge was kept very pure with this very first teacher trained by Hawayo Takata. And my teacher was, very much into maintain the purity of knowledge. They were very diligent about it. But then he talked about how he saw people trained by other, he checked them out, and like healing power was not coming out of from their hands, things like that, and also like in Reiki we have this thing called long what's it called, absentee healing, long distance healing. We could heal people, and the way to do that was completely different with some Reiki teachers. They just did their own thing. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. It might work just as well, but it's not the original thing taught by Hayao Takata. So Reiki is a great example of how purity of knowledge gets lost. It's, you could call it law of entropy. Entropy increases, things, noise get mixed in. Um, especially, and say anyway, so yeah, that's a story, and that's an example. But it happens all the time on all levels. So that's that. So you have to be very diligent and discerning when you're learning anything or hearing stories, whether it's some conspiracy theory or just some rumors about who did what. People add stuff. People misunderstand. People make assumptions, false assumptions. It happens. It's part of human life. So anyway, Maharshi's, the team movement is very diligent about that. They're they're very enthusiastic about maintaining the purity of knowledge from Maharishi and all that.
Okay, so what are some of the other teachings that you resonated with?
I recommend, you said?
That you resonated with? That you resonate with? Any
Um,
other teachings or experiences that you've been exposed to that help shape who you are right now?
Carolin Myss, known, her first book was called The Anatomy of the Spirit. I haven't met her, but I listened to a bunch of her audio tapes, audio recordings, audiobooks on CD. And I was very impressed by her. Her teaching is very deep, and she has evolved since she published her first book, The Anatomy of the Spirit. It it wasn't it, she probably began with auras and subtle bodies and chakras, the seven chakras. I think that's what the first book, Anatomy of the Spirit, is about. But that was a long time ago. Even teachers grow and evolve since they start their teaching business. And her spiritual stuff is pretty deep, about she talks about three levels of power and the sacred contracts, the spirit makes or the soul makes before getting born. Um, so it's just her presentation, the way she talks. It's very gentle, very likable. She doesn't push people's buttons no matter what she says. It's like, even if she shows some tough love or whatever, it doesn't like push her buttons, and
I don't know. I've listened to Carolyn Myss. She pushes my button. I mean, she's very direct. Like she doesn't really sugarcoat anything, you know.
she's. I mean, that's what I like about her. She's very direct. She's very honest. She doesn't sugarcoat, and but I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's a great comparison, but what's her name? Who is that woman? Dr. Laura. I've listened to her a little bit on the radio, and I'm like, she really pushes my buttons. Like the to
Well,
me,
she definitely has a different style, yeah.
I mean, she's definitely tough love, but I don't know. But anyway, Carolyn Myss. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's because I'm a man and she's a woman, but I I like her. Her teachings go straight into my mind. I like it without any resistance. So Carolyn Myss, I like her things about the three levels of power and the sacred contract and reincarnation, all that stuff really resonated with me. I highly recommend her. So David, Deida, Carolyn Myss. Um, Also, this whole thing about auras, aura color. People have different aura colors, and there's this psychic named Rob. He hasn't published anything, but he goes around. He used to give lectures, talks, but I think now only he does consultations. And anyway, through him, I was introduced to a book called "What Color Is Your Aura" by Pamela Osley. And so, his description of aura colors and hers is very complementary. It's pretty much the same. And apart from Pamela Osley, one of Pamela's teacher was a name woman. I don't remember her name, but she wrote a book called. Oh no, sorry. Pamela Osley's book was called Life Colors, and one of her teachers' book was called What Color Is Your Aura? And those two books, Life Colors and What Color Is Your Aura, is like completely complementary. Their description is very similar. And so I got really into this whole aura stuff. It really describes people's personality and tendency, and like I'm violet yellow. I'm half violet, half yellow with some indigo. We talk about the indigo children, and that's where it comes from. Indigo children literally were born with indigo auras. It's not a symbolic, color or archetypal color. It's literally, if you could see it, you could see the color indigo in their aura. Anyway, so that was a real uh, thing. I really got into the aura colors. Rob, Pamela Osley, Life Colors. She wrote a second book called Love Colors. That was more about compatibility. Auras have compatibility too, and for example, people with green aura really pushes my buttons. I can't stand people with green aura. They have this real my way or the highway attitude. And I get along with, I'm violet yellow, so violet yellow people, blue yellow women, things like that. Anyway, so
So,
that
so can you see people's auras?
I cannot, but I have a pretty I studied it, so I have a pretty good sense of guessing people's aura colors, and especially in the spiritual community in Fairfield, Iowa. Only certain there's only about 5 or 6 colors out of the 14 possible colors. Certain people with certain color tend to be attracted to TM and New Age spiritual stuff. Like the opposite would be like a red. Red people are very down to earth, sensory people who only believe they could, things they could perceive with their 5 senses. They don't believe in angels and UFOs, this ooga booga stuff. So, you don't really meet any TM people with red auras. TM people, at least the one I've met, usually are violet, some combination of violet, yellow, blue, green, tan, and then that new color, indigo. It's not that new anymore, but yeah, indigo is a fairly new color. It's called a New Age children's color, and they start to appear like in the 80s, 1980s, I think, in small numbers, but then the number got more and more, and now it's not that unusual. They have grown up, but anyway, so yeah, those 6 colors I've are the one that primarily seen in the Fairfields TM community. So I'm familiar with what kind of people are violet and yellow and blue. Blue is a women's color. Blue is very feminine, very motherly, nurturing, caretaking kind of color. Yellow is fun-loving, prone to addiction. They're more physical. They like, they play with dogs and children and dogs love them. And California is a very yellowish state,
Oh,
with
so places and can have
surfing.
their own colors.
No, I'm talking the people in California.
Oh, I see.
Yellow people like California with the beach and the surfing and skating and rollerblades, and that's a very yellow thing
Well,
to.
maybe that's Southern California or LA and the beach, but where I am right now in the Bay Area, which is just the high tech capital.
Uh, yeah, I'm in southern.
Yeah. So what would you think the
That,
people here, what do you think they would be, the high tech people in Silicon Valley?
where?
The
What?
people in Silicon Valley where I'm at, the high tech people, what color do you
Um,
think they would be?
A lot of tans, tan and violet probably. Tan is a very logical color. It's step-by-step logic, think critically. A lot of mathematician, computer scientists, programmers are probably have a lot of tan in it. Tan is a very intellectual color. But also violet is a very visionary color, A lot of leaders, inventors, social reformers, whatever. Those are very violet. So probably violet too. Violet and tan. That's my guess.
Okay, makes sense to me. So, with everything you've learned and experienced throughout the years on your spiritual path, um, what can you conclude in terms of what you learned? Like, for instance, what do you think the nature of enlightenment is, or how an enlightened person look like?
Uh, it's a very deep and difficult question. Enlightenment. Uh, I do think there is such thing as level of consciousness and evolution of human beings, but the human soul, human consciousness. It's a long journey, and I do think there is such thing as a soul or spirit that you know that gets reincarnated and live different lives and grow and learn different lessons. I don't take the materialistic view of human mind and consciousness is just a byproduct of the brain and it comes and goes and dies. Um, so there are, levels of consciousness, lower consciousness, higher levels of consciousness. In the TM movement, we talk about cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, unity consciousness. Um, One thing I guess you could say is it's very individual and personal. It's, Maharishi gives a general description of higher states of consciousness, but people's, it's not as uniform as he kind of seems to present it to be. It's people's experience really varies, and it's some people seems to like gradually grow, and some people have like a very radical quickening, like awakening experience, and there's a whole range of that. And then there's also people who think they're enlightened, but they're not. They have this delusion or wishful thinking. They misunderstand that they're enlightened. And
Do you think you're enlightened?
no, it's like there are different opinions. There are different theories about enlightenment. There's a magazine, a monthly magazine called What is Enlightenment? That's the explicit title. They changed their name, so it's not no longer called that, but for many years it was called What is Enlightenment? And it was founded by what's his name? Um, I forgot his name, but he was a spiritual kind of seeker and a teacher. And
Or is it Andrew?
excuse me?
I believe. What is enlightenment? He had a publication, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Is it Andrew?
Andrew Cohen, Andrew Cohen.
Andrew
Yeah,
Crone, yeah, yeah.
I think he was the student of Mother Mira or something. I think. Could
Hmm.
be wrong. Anyway, Mother Mira is one of those Indian saints. And, so like that's a great magazine where people from different spiritual traditions and paths come together and share their ideas. And there's like a whole range of all possible descriptions and ideas and theories of enlightenment. So I don't have an definitive answer. I'm very eclectic. I checked out a lot of stuff, from Indian stuff to Chinese stuff and Japanese stuff, and it's like that metaphor of bunch of blind men touching an elephant and describing it. That whole analogy comes from uh, Buddhism. That yeah, the blind man touching the nose, the tusk of what do you call the The trunk of the elephant says it's like a snake, you know, and another blind man is touching the leg and says it's like a tree. Another man is touching the tail and it's like a little brush or whatever, you know. So enlightenment seems to be like that, you know, like people have insights and experience from different angles and they describe it in different ways. And there are different paths, there are different spiritual paths, you know, like different religions and different teachings, but also then even within those teachings, there are, you know, each individual has different nervous system, different makeup, and they, you know, they're subjective and there are different descriptions, different experiences. So, but enlightenment ultimately is about unity with everything, with the creation, with the creator. You know, ultimately, I think unity or oneness is the ultimate reality. That's undeniable. I mean, how to realize that, how to, you know, make that real is another thing. But and this whole thing about ultimate reality being unity or creation being oneness at its most fundamental level is also the conclusion of modern science, or especially physics. You know, physics has come a long way since the time of Newton, and when you have a bird's eye view of physics, it's really a history of discovering more and more unity and unification. And now it comes to the point of saying that there is a unified field of all the laws of nature. A unified field is that one field, one source of all creation that gives rise to whole creation. That's the language of physics, not some spiritual teaching. You know, Maharshi, you know, spoke in the language of the time, which is science. We live in the age of science. So he talked a lot about the unified field, and he said, in his contribution was saying that the unified field of physics is a field of consciousness, a field of pure consciousness. That's huge. That's really big. Um,
Why is that big?
well, it's because materialism is still very big among scientists and in the populace. You know, it's the, a lot of people still think that human consciousness is created by matter. It's a byproduct of matter. It's a secondary thing. And it's very reasonable to think that, you know, when the brain's activity does determine your mind's activity and all that, and when the brain goes, mind goes, and when the brain dies, then the person is gone. You know, it appears to be gone. You know, so there's a lot of, you know, good reason to have a materialistic view. But see, materialism, if you actually study the forefront of modern physics, materialism is history. It's no longer valid. I mean, quantum theory is 100 years old, and quantum theory says matter is just the surface level of creation. It's when you probe deeply into matter, it stops being hard and rigid. It becomes this soft, unlocalized thing called fields, quantum fields, you know. And I don't fully understand it. It gets very abstract, and I try to understand it's a little bit beyond me. But you know, it's like the wave on an ocean. You know, the particles are like waves on the ocean, but waves are not some isolated, bounded existence. It's part of this connected thing called an ocean. You know, that there are many waves, and so there's that multiplicity, but they're not independent, unrelated existence. You know, all waves are connected, and that's the ultimate reality as I understand it. And that's what physics says too. And so, you know, as physics progressed, you know, more and more things that looked different on the surface turned out to be same the same thing on a deeper level, like water and vapor and ice and snow looking different on the surface level, being hard and soft and gaseous and cold and hot and all that, but they're all unified at the level of the molecule H2O. And also, like in terms of mechanics, in the time of Newton, initially they thought laws of motion and motion and stuff governing Earth was different from governing, things governing the heavens, like the motion of the planets. It was called terrestrial mechanics versus celestial mechanics. But Newton's equations unified all that. And then, magnetism and electricity. One was static electricity on the back of a cat, and there is also lightning, and then magnetism, these magnets with stick iron, and those things were thought to be unrelated things in nature, these forces of nature. But then electromagnetism is, now we call it electromagnetism, electromagnetic force. It got unified, and likewise, then the four forces of, electromagnetism, gravity, weak force, and strong force got more and more unified with, as science progressed, so we don't have a complete finished theory, unified field theory, or what we call the theory of everything, but we have science, physics has evolved enough to have a glimpse of the unified field. They don't, any decent physicists don't argue the existence of unified field. It's just a matter of like how the details right now. Like Hawking, Stephen Hawking's work has been working, try to unify quantum theory with, relativity and all that. But that was Einstein's dream to come up with a unified field theory. He worked on it for like decades, and he failed. But Einstein had a great intuition for physics, and he knew that ultimately everything was one. It had to be unified. So realizing that is enlightenment, in my opinion. And I'm sure, like, and enlightenment is not some peak of a mountain like you reach and it's over. There are a range of enlightenment. Maharsh talks about different levels of higher states of consciousness. In his language, he calls it cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, unity consciousness. So there are stages in enlightenment. That's part of the confusion, because people in a state of enlightenment might be in different states of enlightenment, and then they give descriptions, and so those descriptions, are different, and it might even sound contradictory. So I think that's part of the confusions regarding the understanding of enlightenment. There's a range of enlightenment, and so there are different descriptions at different levels of enlightenment.
So, do you think it's worth it to strive for enlightenment?
Excuse me?
Do you think people should be striving for enlightenment?
Striving. Yeah, ultimately. Yep. People, every human being have an innate desire for growth. Ultimately, people, that's their instinct. That's their nature. People, initially it might be about, but people want more. People just can't. People want to be happier, stronger, or more wealth, or more knowledge, more understanding. But ultimately, the human soul won't stop till he reaches a state of unity, state of self-realization, state of God realization. Um,
Well, what if somebody is really struggling? Let's say somebody in Africa who is in poverty, or anywhere in the world is in poverty. Do
I
you,
wait. You have to repeat that. I can't. You're not speaking
okay,
clearly.
so what if someone is really struggling
I was
in their
struggling.
physical life in terms of not having enough to eat? So,
Yeah,
do
I mean,
you think that that person should also be striving for enlightenment?
well, there is that whole Maslow's level of, whatever it was called,
Hierarchy of needs?
yeah, hierarchy of needs and stuff. That's very real. Can't deny that. Um, but even a poor person could be spiritual. Um,
Yeah, but
yeah,
maybe only to a level of where he's not thinking about where his next meal is going to be, right?
I mean, first things first, your physical survival is more important. I mean, seeking all this stuff is a kind of a luxury to a certain extent.
Right.
Um, and I could totally relate to that being in a state of poverty for a long time. But I mean, you can just people can just do their best. Yeah, there is much poverty, much suffering in the world. Um,
What do you think causes the suffering in the world?
excuse me, cause?
What do you think is the cause of suffering?
Um, well, that's a very deep question. Um, and I only have some partial insights, but there is a thing called law of karma, the law of action and reaction. As you sow, so shall you reap. Um, and in its, the big picture is incomprehensible. It's too complicated. What's the cause and effect of everything? But people have karmas, and whatever the soul has done in the past, determines what happens today. And I know we don't want suffering, but for whatever reason, all of the summation of the past action of the soul determines what happens today. Also, you know, on our level, from our ordinary level of awareness, we don't want suffering, it's painful. But, on a more higher, deeper level, the soul chose that terrible suffering before he or she was born. That's the kind of thing Carolin Myss talks about. And it's beyond me, but my comprehension. But the purpose of life is for spiritual evolution, and for that evolution and growth, the soul chooses a challenging life, it's born, and and forgets all that. That's what usually apparently happens. The soul has this kind of co-authors, co-writes this life scenario with the universe, and then does go through this voluntary amnesia when it goes into the mother's womb, and then gets born as a baby and goes through all this stuff, good and bad. But
So, in
ultimately,
other words, so you believe in reincarnation.
totally reincarnation. Yep. I mean, there's no other. The law of karma and reincarnation to me is the only thing that could explain how things are. The total unfairness. Some people are born into a wealthy family, and some people are born into utter poverty and suffering, and that it's either that or it's materialism, where there is absolutely no purpose in life, no meaning in life. Everything is completely random and just quote happens to be the way it is. A lot of people use that expression, happens to be. Yeah. So that's one view. That's very empty view of life, and that's a materialistic view of life. It's first of all, there is no soul, there is no spirit, there's consciousness and mind is just a byproduct of the electrical activity of the brain, and matter comes first, matter is primary. And so there's a beginning to consciousness and there's an end to consciousness. It might last for a few decades, and people dying and they're gone forever. They cease to exist. There's no previous life, there's no future life, there's no afterlife. So that's one view. And even a materialist tries to find meaning in life some one way or the other, but there are all these there are researches and stories about people having memories of past lives or recovering it through hypnosis or whatever, and there are all these research that verify these children have memories of their past life, so they go to the village he or she is supposed to have lived in the past, and it all adds up with people's names and place names and descriptions of the place. And there's all this tremendous numbers of stories about what we usually call near-death experience. And some people say it's all just in the mind, it's just illusion, it's just an illusion, it's not real. But oh yeah, I think those at least some percentage of those near-death experience stories are valid and real, and some are very insightful. It really gives spiritual insight about everything, about our life. So, it's not just blind faith. I think there are evidences of, reincarnation and, life after death, through these stories of past life memories and near-death experiences. Among, but also there are teachings of, great teachers and masters and gurus too. But yeah, materialism is an illusion. It's I mean, matter plays a role in life. I mean, everything's, there is matter, but it's a surface level of existence. It's even in physics, when you probe deeply, all this rigid boundaries of hardness just dissolves into fields of quantum fields and unified field. It's everything like a wave. Things are like waves in the ocean. So, to me, all the deep understanding of spirituality and physics are very much congruent. They go hand in hand.
So, do you think that we have free will, or is everything predestined?
That's another deep question. I got tired of thinking about it. My brain got fried from thinking about it too much, so I don't really think about it too much anymore. But um, uh, ultimately, I don't have an answer. It's free will is one of those things that seems to exist, but also doesn't seem to exist either. So right now, I just kind of pretend. I just kind of pretend that it exists and just go along with it. The more I study things, it seems like there is such thing as fate, destiny, predetermined things. So, I mean, the more I live, I I'm becoming more and more deterministic. Yes, but at the same time, we have to be careful not to get too caught up with determinism because it makes you very passive and pessimistic, really.
Yeah, it's very cynical. Yeah.
Cynical and just unmotivated, and I'm kind of stuck in that state right now. I'm very dead. I'm very, you know, I'm in a spiritual limbo right now.
But with all your experiences, as a spiritual teacher, I mean, surely you stated a lot of benefits that you've gotten from Carolin Myss and Maharishi and David Deida and Rob Roth, those people. So, you think being on a spiritual path, um, what do you think is the benefit of being on a spiritual path? If someone was just starting out, you know, being interested in spirituality, what would you tell them?
Uh, benefit. Benefit. Uh, well, Maharshi says nature of life is to grow. I mean, I mean, growth and evolution is human nature, I think. Um, I mean, people could get stuck and all that, but we are designed to grow, seek higher anything, higher states. Um, and that desire could go awry too, but I'm not going to go into too much details. But mm, it's just seeking spirituality, it just fulfills that need. We it the Indian spirituality of the Veda talks about this thing called Veda Lila. Lila means play, and the whole of creation is a play of consciousness. It's this you know oneness of pure consciousness playing with itself. It's a self-interacting play of consciousness, and I mean ultimately, I think when you know you I don't know if the term gaining enlightenment is the right way to express that. I'm not sure if it's something you gain or achieve, but whatever, whenever that realization happens, I think everybody's just gonna get a good laugh. I think that's what happens. Like that was good. That was a good one. Um,
Okay.
Also, probably like when you like die and move on to the next, not the next life, but the next, the other side of the world beyond the veil. I think it's like you just finished a play, finished playing. You feel like you're an actor. You just finished playing in a play, on stage. That's probably what life is like. Everybody, souls goes into this physical body and play their role of being a man and a woman and a friend and father, mother, and whatever. And I don't know. I mean, that's my current understanding. But Veda Lila, yeah, creation is a play of consciousness, and the game is to like start from a state of pure ignorance and go up and up and gain, evolve. That's the name of the game. And that's the human nature. That's the nature of the soul and spirit to go up this level of consciousness. Starting from pure ignorance to less and less ignorant state, more and more enlightened. So in that sense, spirituality is not a choice. It's just by design. People have to seek it one way or the other. And people, a person can be a total materialist, just wanting money and pleasure and all that. But that's that state they're in, and in the next life he might be a different person. But even in terms of materialism and hedonism, there's still that sense of wanting more, not being satisfied at where you are. And I mean, it's not about greed. It's we're talking about a healthy state, healthy way of wanting more, but it's complicated. But
Well,
the
isn't
point
it
is,
possible that even if you had everything you wanted, I just recently listened to an interview where this one person was a spiritual speaker, and he always wanted to live a very kind of simple life on the farm, things like that, growing food and everything. So he accomplished that, but within a few years, he said that he was wanting something more, you know?
yeah,
So it just seems interesting that sometimes when we do have our desires fulfilled, we always want something else. So this
or
idea of having like that, this idea that we'll be happy once we have everything that we want, maybe that's not, totally accurate.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I mean, the luxury and hedonism, I guess, serves a purpose of, making a person aware that that's not enough. That cannot fulfill one's spirit and soul ultimately. Um, yeah.
Yeah, but
So
even
yeah,
someone who wasn't speaking luxury and he was just speaking the opposite, just very frugal life, or maybe someone takes off and goes to the Himalayas and they become a sadhu, you know, uh, a sannyasi or something like that. Does that just because they renounce the world totally, does that mean that they're going to be happy? You
they can be, of course. I mean, sadhu seems to be very happy people.
know?
It's an individual thing, it's each individual's unique, and they're at different levels, and they have different values, and ultimately you can't really compare people. ultimately. It's a personal, individual thing. This thing about enlightenment and happiness, and so yeah, there are people who renounce the world and live as a sadhu in India, and they seem to be happy people. They're more satisfied. They're happy that they're on that path.
Hmm. But yet there are probably other people who've tried that and realized, oh, it's not for that one.
Yep, there's a lot of trial and error. I mean, we are in a state of ignorance, and we
Mm-hmm.
try, we check out things. There are
Mm-hmm.
people who convert to a different religion. It's amazing. A fundamental Christian becoming Hindu, and a Hindu becoming Christian, and Christian becoming Muslim, and Muslim becoming atheist or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, people sometimes go through radical changes in terms of their path. There are all these recovering Catholics, for example. um, People completely switch religions and teachings, and some click, some resonate, some don't, and ultimately it's a mystery. I don't, ultimately human life and everything is a mystery. It's beyond, human. There's a limit to how much the human intellect can comprehend all this stuff. But yeah. So there are different paths, and some people, are fine by, are happy, resign. What's the word? Being reclusive and renouncing everything, and it depends. It's depends on the individual.
Okay. So can you summarize your message for the audience?
Message. I
Yeah.
don't have a message.
Or recommendations, like I said before, somebody who's new on the spiritual path, who wants to try meditation or having a spiritual practice, what would you say is the importance of doing this?
Important thing. Well, I guess being open-minded, being
Being what?
don't being open-minded.
Open minded.
Don't get too rigid and fundamentalistic and exclusive. Like this path is the only true path, and this is the only true way to know God. I'm talking especially about fundamental Christians, or some sects of Buddhism are like that too. I've noticed in Japan, like this is the only correct right path, and this one's the only has the purity of knowledge, and then they can't they get trapped in a very rigid boundary, and they pretty much stop growing, in my opinion. They don't. You have to be open. You have to check out different knowledge, different teachings, and including science, and learn as much as you can, because different teachings and knowledge, shed light on spirituality from different angles. Plus, there are such thing as cults too. There's such thing as crazy teachers and whatever, and some of them end up having mass suicides and stuff. You have to be very careful, very discerning. You have to think critically. You can't be naive and Pollyanna-ish. You have to think. You have to think deeper and deeper. You can't be too authoritarian either. You can't just have a blind faith in some teacher or leader. You have to be always thinking for yourself, in terms of everything, but in terms of spirituality too. Be open-minded, be diligent, be critical thinking, think carefully, think for yourself. That's a good advice for, living life in general, including spirituality.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I have
Well,
made a lot of mistakes myself too, so you learn from mistakes.
okay. Well, thank you so much, Paul. It was a pleasure talking to you. I learned a lot. And you've been watching the Transfer of Awakening channel, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Paul.
Yep, you're welcome.